tipping point was really both the personal and moral injury that people are suffering from having to make these decisions.
A Providence doctor describes the day this week that pushed the hospital to start rationing care. From Alaska Public Media, this is Statewide News on Alaska News Nightly for Friday, September 17th. Good evening, I'm Casey Grove. Also tonight, for the first time, the Lower Kuskokwim School District has hired foreign teachers to fill positions.
It is really at a crisis point everywhere we go. I mean, just not even applicants. We can't even find them.
Those stories and more tonight on Alaska News Nightly.
Alaska News Nightly is brought to you in part by your local public radio station.
Pain is personal, but treating pain takes teamwork. Did you know that early physical therapy intervention for back pain can reduce costs and improve outcomes? Physical therapists are movement experts that treat people of all ages and abilities to improve and maintain quality of life. You have the right to choose your own PT. A referral is not required in the state of Alaska. This message sponsored by the Alaska Physical Therapy Association.
Alaska's largest hospital reached a tipping point last week. Providence, Alaska Medical Center's Chief of Staff, Dr. Kristen Solana Walkinshaw, says it was Saturday, September 11th, when she realized the hospital could no longer meet its normal standards of care. The overload of COVID-19 patients was too much. She told Alaska Public Media's Liz Ruskin about that day and why the doctors felt they had to declare that they had moved to crisis standards.
Separately, 3 doctors contacted Solana Walkinshaw that Saturday. 2 are heads of their specialty departments. One, she says, was a cardiologist.
All of whom were commenting that we had started rationing care.
Triage is nothing new for a hospital. Emergency rooms always take their most serious cases first. No department has unlimited resources. But the doctors and other medical professionals who practice at Providence say they are beyond that point. For extraordinary shortages, Solana Walkinshaw says Providence has a special triage team to decide how to ration care.
That team was also invoked for the first time on Saturday.
One of the shortages was for continuous dialysis, systems that help people whose kidneys need much more than outpatient dialysis.
We had the staffing and equipment for 2 patients to have that, and we had 4 patients who needed it.
She's not sure how many of the 4 were COVID patients. COVID, though, is compounding all problems at the hospital because the staff is stretched so thin. In the ICU, the staff ratio for a complex intubated patient is usually 1-to-1, 1 nurse to 1 patient. These days, the nurses have had to care for 3 such patients at a time.
Tripling is what they called it. So it's rough.
Another serious shortage that weekend was beds. Solana Walkinshaw learned of a cardiology patient in rural Alaska who needed an operation, but Anchorage hospitals were too full to accept a transfer. She's not sure if the patient survived. That Saturday, she called an emergency meeting of the executive committee that represents the independent doctors, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants who practice at Providence. They met Sunday, Solana Walkinshaw says. Tuesday, they announced they've begun rationing health care.
I think the tipping point was really both the personal and moral injury that people are suffering from having to make these decisions, and the prolonged nature of this happening so long when everyone is already so fatigued.
Other Alaska hospitals have not followed Providence, but every hospital in the Anchorage area is severely stressed by the state's COVID surge.
We have not formally declared that we are in crisis standards of care.
Dr. Holly Alfrey is the Chief Medical Officer at Alaska Native Medical Center.
However, we do have an incident command that meets on a daily basis to assess the situation. And sometimes that means that our ED is very full and holding patients. Sometimes that means that our labor and delivery can't take any more. And a lot of the time it means that our CCU is just pretty much at the limit.
CCU, that's Critical Care Unit. Sometimes all of Anchorage Hospital's emergency departments are full. When that happens, they take turns accepting the next patient. Solana Walkinshaw says she doesn't know what to make of the fact that only Providence has declared that it's rationing care. She says the declaration was intended to level with the public, but also to send a message. The situation is dire. Last year, when the pandemic was new, the staff prepared to be overwhelmed by COVID patients. But they didn't have to deploy the contingency plans then, Solana Walkinshaw says, because Alaskans flattened the curve. Last Saturday, she and other doctors felt it was time to reignite that sense of urgency inside the hospital and with the public at large. Reporting from Anchorage, I'm Liz Ruskin.
The city of Bethel could soon lose nearly half of its police force following a new vaccine mandate. The mandate, announced on Monday, gives city employees 2 weeks to receive their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. KYUK's Olivia Eberts reports.
Most city employees are vaccinated, but about half the force is not. And that half doesn't live in Bethel. Instead, the 6 unvaccinated officers fly in and out, working 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. The city adopted this schedule after struggling to retain officers. The city's Human Resources Director, James Harris, says 2 of the unvaccinated officers live in Wasilla, and the other 4 reside in Georgia. Wasilla has some of the highest rates of COVID-19 transmission in the state, and the southeastern United States, where Georgia's located, has some of the highest COVID-19 transmission rates in the country. So why don't the officers want to get vaccinated? I spoke to the 2 who live in Wasilla. Officer Skylar Smith says he opposes the vaccine on religious grounds.
I'm not having anything injected into my body.
He wouldn't specify his beliefs. He would only identify himself as non-denominational Christian. Smith acknowledges the reality of the virus and has tested positive for COVID-19 in the past. He says he'll apply for a religious exemption. Investigator Vincent Garay, also of Wasilla, said he doesn't want to get the vaccine either.
I am severely allergic to aspirin. I do not want to die.
None of the COVID-19 vaccines contain aspirin. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention encourages vaccinations for people with allergies to oral medication. The CDC advises avoiding the Moderna and Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines only if you have a severe allergy to polyethylene glycol, an ingredient in the mRNA vaccines. Often, if you have an allergy to one ingredient in one vaccine, another vaccine should be safe for you. The city is offering medical exemptions, which Garay plans to apply for. They must be signed by a medical doctor saying the patient has a valid concern. Garay says he'll also apply for a religious exemption.
Do you even know what's in the vaccine? I even heard that it has even aborted fetuses in it. That's against my religion if it has.
HR Director James Harris says that all religious exemptions go through an internal review process to make sure they're valid. If an employee says they have an issue with a policy because of their religion, Harris checks the policy of their religion to make sure that it's a religious belief rather than an individual belief. So although investigator Garay says he can't get the vaccine because of his Catholic faith, that won't legally hold up in the city. HR Director James Harris says he called the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church on Wednesday.
And I specifically asked, does the Catholic faith prohibit vaccination? And the answer I got back immediately was, no, we do not. In fact, we encourage it.
Both investigator Garay and Officer Smith say they've been in touch with lawyers about the mandate. City Attorney Libby Bacalar says the mandate is, quote, legally sound and fully defensible. If Garay, Smith, and other unvaccinated Bethel police officers are all terminated when the vaccine mandate goes into effect, the police force will be cut in half. Human Resources Director James Harris says it's important to think about who Bethel will be losing if they are terminated.
Persons who are unvaccinated, who don't even live in Bethel, who are not from Bethel, who are commuting back and forth between the lower 48 every 2 weeks, traveling unvaccinated, and are interacting with this general public on the highest intensity that somebody could interact with the general public.
The CDC says that unvaccinated people are about 5 times as likely to spread COVID-19 than vaccinated people. In Bethel, I'm Olivia Eberts.
Coming up, researchers study a woolly mammoth that lived thousands of years ago in Alaska.
It was like watching this soap opera of this mammoth's life kind of emerge in front of our eyes in real time.
That's ahead. Stay with us.
Alaska News Nightly is brought to you in part by your local public radio station.
Everyone is excited for the 2021-2022 school year. It's important to prepare for an active year ahead. Whether you play competitive sports or just enjoy being active, it's important to make your overall health a priority. So get your COVID-19 vaccine, stay active and involved, check in with friends and family, and bounce back from COVID together and make it a great year. This message sponsored by the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services.
A national teacher shortage compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic left the Lower Kuskokwim School District scrambling. With only a few months before the start of the school year, the district had dozens of teaching positions to fill. KYUK's Greg Kim reports the district looked out of the country for solutions.
Over the past few weeks, new teachers for the Lower Kuskokwim School District have been arriving in Bethel exhausted after 36 hours of travel. That's because they're flying in from the Philippines. One of them is Socrates Mbezin. He'll be teaching math and science in Chafornik. In the Philippines, Socrates had been a college math professor in the landlocked province of Tarlac.
It is quite a remote place because we are situated in a highland, no neighbors, no big numbers around. It's just like this.
In Tarlac, Socrates shared a home with his parents, his sister, his brother, and several nieces and nephews, and he said his family just keeps growing.
And my salary is not increasing that much. So when I got this opportunity, I think right away, this is a chance for me to improve the life that we have at the moment, the life of my family. That's the heart of the Filipino people. We are very close to our family.
Socrates showed me a picture on his phone of his 9-year-old nephew, who he has adopted as his own.
That's him. So he's a big boy now. And I entrust him to my sisters.
Socrates said in return, he will send his sisters a portion of his salary. The 3 teachers I talked with said they were making 4 to 5 times more with LKSD than what they made in the Philippines. The average income in the Philippines is around $4,000 per year, according to the World Bank. Out of 82 new teachers LKSD hired this year, 10 are from the Philippines. This is the first time that LKSD has recruited and hired teachers from outside the United States. LKSD Human Resources Director Andre Engbertson said the district has historically had trouble hiring enough teachers, but in recent years, she said there's been a severe shortage of math and science teachers nationwide.
It is really at a crisis point everywhere we go. Just not even applicants. We can't even find them.
And then she said a pandemic made a bad recruiting environment even worse for potential hires.
Many said, I need to stay closer to home for family reasons or just a fear of COVID, not wanting to leave their home areas, which put us at another challenge of, okay, now how are we going to fill these positions?
That's when Engbertson heard about another rural Alaska school district, the Bering Strait School District, that filled its staffing shortage with teachers from the Philippines. She got on the phone right away.
But the process is fairly lengthy.
She said there's embassy interviews and visa applications and lots of paperwork.
And that just took a lot longer than we expected.
That's why the first teachers from the Philippines arrived in Bethel in September, after LKSD's school year had already begun. When they arrived, they were greeted by several Filipinos already living in town. One of them was Glenda Swope, an LKSD preschool teacher in Bethel who immigrated from the Philippines in 2004. She said she wanted to provide the new teachers a sense of familiarity. She knows the feeling of arriving in a foreign place.
It's like going in a ship that you don't know who is the captain, or you know where you go.
Glenda says at least 20 Filipinos live in Bethel. She says some work as teachers like her, some are at the Bethel Youth Facility, but the largest number are nurses. She said many Filipinos came for jobs. Others, like her, came to the U.S. after marrying an American. Glenda says moving from the Philippines to Western Alaska is not as drastic a change as it may appear.
All of them, they said, I feel like I'm home. Yeah, like me too. Like I feel like I'm home because we grew up in a simple life, in a simple way. And we grew up with, close-knit families.
The Filipino teachers say they will be exchanging cultures with the communities they'll be in. New teacher Amparo Faraon says she is excited to be able to share her cooking with her students.
I let them taste sinigang and adobo, pancit. Yes, yes, yes.
The new Filipino teachers are planning to stay at least 3 years on their current visas, but first they'll need to survive their first winter. After coming from a country with an annual average temperature of 80 degrees Fahrenheit, Socrates Mbezin said he's excited to feel the cool breeze. In Bethel, I'm Greg Kim.
Norway's ambassador to the United States has been in Alaska this week. Anniken Krutnes, Norway's first female ambassador to the U.S., has been in Anchorage meeting with state leaders to discuss shared interests. And she also met with members of the local Norwegian community and spoke at the Anchorage Museum as a guest of the Alaska World Affairs Council. Krutnes says her country's strong alliance with the United States and its position in the Arctic mean Alaska and Norway have a lot in common.
We've been talking about climate change, which is, of course, a huge issue for all of us. And at the same time, we've also been talking about how we can have a sustainable economy in the Arctic. We want, of course, the Arctic to be sustainable both economically, socially, and environmentally, and we have to be able to do all of that.
In what ways can, I guess, Alaska and Norway cooperate on that?
I think one starting point is, or it's important to remember that climate change happens much quicker in the Arctic than in the rest of the world. But the reason for the climate change are emissions that comes from the rest of the world. So we cannot in the Arctic fix climate change by changing only our behavior. Climate change is a global problem and it has to be fixed globally because the emissions come from the entire world, not only the Arctic. As everyone on this planet, we have to try to make our carbon footprint as little as possible when we have any activity. But that is actually not so different from the Arctic as for the rest of the world.
Are there specific initiatives that Norway would like to see the United States sign on to towards those goals?
Well, we were, of course, pleased to see that the U.S. Again came back to the Paris Agreement. That is hugely important. And the Arctic Council has an initiative to report on the emissions of methane and black carbon. And the U.S. has now committed to report on that. And that is, of course, also very, very important, especially for the Arctic.
In general, as far as diplomatic concerns, have things improved, I guess, with this new presidency from Norway's perspective?
Norway has a very strong relationship with the U.S. And it goes centuries back. And today I met the Norwegian community, and I was actually surprised by how many Norwegians there are here in Alaska. And our relations go way back, and they are very solid. And we cooperate well with any administration that would be in the White House. With this administration, we also have some important cooperation on the climate issue, which is, of course, we're very happy for that. And we also discuss other global issues with the new administration, such as global health problems.
Speaking of security issues and NATO, are there shared concerns between the two countries about Russia's expansion in the Arctic?
Well, we see a military buildup on the Russian side, and of course we have to keep an eye on that. I would say that the Arctic region is still a peaceful and a prosperous and a predictable region, and it is important that we keep it like that.
This is a completely different question, and so forgive me, but have you been aware of Norwegian dog mushers' success in races like the Iditarod here in Alaska? What do you think about that?
That's a great question. I think we and Alaska have a lot in common. We like the outdoor life. We're tough people. We're able to deal with the cold weather and the dark, and I'm not surprised that the Norwegians win the race.
I think, unfortunately for the Alaskans, nobody is surprised that they keep winning.
So we could also talk about cross-country skiing or ski jumping if you would like. We share a lot of the same interests.
That was Norwegian Ambassador Anniken Krutnes speaking in Anchorage this week, on her birthday, no less.
Alaska News Nightly is brought to you in part by
Alaska Air Cargo, connecting 21 Alaska communities to and from the lower 48 with scheduled shipping services. More information at alaskacargo.com.
Everyone knows eating fruits and veggies promotes a long and healthy life. It's important to make every bite count. Alaskans are lucky to have greens and berries from the land, as well as fresh, frozen, and canned. When it comes to living a long and healthy life, remember, every bite counts. This message sponsored by USDA SNAP Ed.
Bartlett Regional Hospital in Juneau opened a wing just for COVID patients yesterday afternoon. 6 of its 7 beds were full this morning. These beds are in addition to the 12 critical care spots also used to treat COVID patients. Infection preventionist Charlie Gribben says the COVID wing is one of the measures the hospital can take to manage more patients.
Because we have many COVID patients, so it helped with efficiency of staff, so we could move them all together.
About a third of the regional hospital's beds are occupied by patients with illnesses related to COVID infections. Case counts in Juneau are at an all-time high. Gribben says that does mean the hospital is preparing in case there are more patients, but she says Juneau's high vaccination rate means fewer hospitalizations.
So we're seeing that even though we may have a high number of positivity rate, people are doing well because they're vaccinated. And it's turned it into a mild illness, and they dodged that hospitalization and severe illness probability because of vaccination.
On Friday afternoon, there were 7 patients currently at the hospital with infectious COVID-19 cases. Three-time Yukon Quest sled dog race champion Brent Sass says he shot an aggressive black bear while moose hunting alone near his kennel in Eureka. Sass says the young bear began showing up at his hunting camp, once chewing up a pair of boots and another time climbing a tree where Sass was in a stand looking for a moose.
Got real close and I had to kind of kick him down.
Sass says he did not have bear spray and shot the animal when it later showed up outside his tent in the dark.
Literally unzipped the tent door and he was like 5 feet. His eyes were staring me in the face. And I yelled like, "Hey, get out of here. Hey, bear." And he didn't move. I grabbed my gun and he was still just staring at me and like at point blank range.
Sass says he's always been able to coexist with bears in the past.
Or they would move out when I moved in, and I've never had a problem with this before. I mean, I live in the wilderness, so I'm interacting with wildlife all the time.
He says this bear appeared to be predatory.
He was definitely checking me out, and he was not scared of me. The look in his eye was like, I'm not backing down.
Sass says he is now processing the bear meat into sausage and jerky, after which he plans to get back to moose hunting. A University of Alaska Fairbanks study featured on the cover of the journal Science explores the life story of a woolly mammoth that lived 17,000 years ago. KUAC's Mary Auld reports.
Thousands of years ago, a woolly mammoth researchers dubbed Kik lumbered across what is now the state of Alaska. There were times when he stayed in one area, likely in a group with other mammoths. At one point, Kik took off on a long trip, covering great distances of icy landscape. Researchers think that means he left his mother's herd and struck out on his own. At 28 years old, Kik died above the Arctic Circle, likely of starvation. Lead researcher Matt Wooler said, "In the lab,
It was like watching this soap opera of this mammoth's life kind of emerge in front of our eyes in real time.
Wooler directs the Stable Isotope Facility at UAF. How could researchers uncover such detail about the life of a long-dead animal? They used information stored in Kick's fossilized tusk to learn about his life. The first step was for the scientists to figure out how to cut the tusk down its center.
I mean, it took us an entire day to split it, and 6 people in a very large bandsaw.
Then, researchers chemically analyzed each section of the tusk. Wooler showed off the tusk in his office.
And right here, which is kind of pointing at you, this is the young mammoth here. And this piece over here that you see right here, you see this dark part here. This is what's called the pulp cavity.
The scientists found clues about Kick's life in the isotopes in the fossil. Isotopes are different versions of atoms of a single element. When an animal eats or drinks, its body takes on the unique isotopes from the materials they ingest. The character of those isotopes depends on the location that food comes from.
And there's a little phrase that goes with isotope science: you are what you eat. And you're not just what you eat, you're also where you eat.
Parts of the body that grow longer over time, like hair, or, in Kick's case, tusks, serve as a record of what and where an animal ate and drank. Scientists matched the isotopes in Kick's tusks with the isotopes present in different areas in Alaska to create a map of his life.
Yeah, it's like a chemical GPS unit.
Wooler said the study contributes to a large body of research about the reasons woolly mammoths went extinct. And Kick's story could also hold answers about the future. That's because changes in climate likely played a role in mammoths' extinction.
It's also shining a light on our concerns for existing animals that live in the Arctic today and are facing very significant environmental change and climate change.
The tusk scientists studied will be displayed at the Museum of the North in Fairbanks. It will be accompanied by a life-sized artistic rendering of Kick painted by paleo artist James Havens. Wooler worked with the artist so the painting reflects the information the study uncovered about Kick's life. In the painting, the mammoth stands enormous against an icy backdrop, staring at the viewer from deep in the past. For KUAC, I'm Mary Auld.
And that's all for this edition of Alaska News Nightly. If you missed any of tonight's stories, we're online at alaskapublic.org and wherever you get your podcasts. We had reports tonight from Liz Ruskin in Anchorage, Olivia Eberts and Greg Kim in Bethel, Claire Strempel in Juneau, and Dan Bross and Mary Auld in Fairbanks. Our audio engineer is Tobin Shelby. Annie Fight produced tonight's show, and I'm Casey Grove. Good night.
Alaska News Nightly was made possible in part by your local public radio station. One of the greatest honors for a public media station is delivering on its promise to provide quality programming and news you can trust to the communities it serves. What you hear on air is the result of a dedicated team working together to bring you the best. It's a privilege to be a part of your day. Thank you for listening, for your feedback, and for your support. This is Statewide News on Alaska Public Media.